When you look at someone, what do you really see? Eyes may capture the color of their skin, the shape of their body, or the expression on their face. But have you ever noticed how quickly the mind settles for the visible and forgets the invisible? Every person carries a world within them, a fragrance unseen, a story untold, a light unnoticed. To live without seeing this is like staring at the ocean and believing it is only waves, never realizing the depths that lie beneath. When you look at another human being, the first thing that comes to you is always the surface. You see clothes, face, skin, behavior, and maybe a little bit of personality. But this is nothing more than the mask that life wears. If you stop at appearances, you miss the real presence standing before you. To see the invisible in everyone is to refuse to be trapped by what is obvious and instead sense the essence of the person that the eyes alone cannot reveal. One way to enter this dimension is through listening, not with your ears alone, but with your whole being. Most people do not truly listen, they simply wait for their turn to speak. But when you listen as if every word carries the weight of their inner world, you open yourself to the invisible layers of their existence. Beyond words lies the tone, the silence, the trembling of the heart that seeks expression. If you are attentive enough, you begin to feel the energy that radiates beyond their form, a vibration that speaks louder than their sentences. The invisible is also hidden in the struggles that people conceal. Most smiles are carefully painted, most confident gestures are armor to cover wounds. When you recognize this, you stop treating people as finished products and begin to see them as journeys in progress. To see the invisible is to notice the battles that never reach the surface, the scars no one displays, the vulnerability every human carries quietly within. It requires dropping judgments because judgments are like walls. They blind you to the truth that lies behind appearances. Silence plays a powerful role in this seeing. Words are useful, but silence often reveals more. In moments of stillness, you can feel the child within the other person, the innocence that has not been destroyed by years of struggle. When you respect their uniqueness, not trying to fit them into your categories, you glimpse the fingerprint of consciousness that belongs only to them. Every individual carries a spark that no one else can duplicate, and if you meet them with openness, that spark slowly becomes visible. The final key is compassion. Curiosity only probes from the outside, but compassion enters from the inside. When you approach someone with compassion, you are no longer looking at their face, their body, or their roles. You are looking at the life force itself that keeps them alive. In that moment, you do not just see a person, you see life in its purest form shining through them. To live this way is to recognize that every human being is far more than they appear, that beneath the surface lies a vastness waiting to be seen. To truly listen with presence means to dissolve the urge to dominate a conversation, to stop waiting for the moment where your voice interrupts theirs. It is not passive hearing, it is active receiving. When someone speaks, every word, every pause, every tremble carries the weight of their inner world. If your attention is scattered, if your mind is already crafting a response, you lose the depth that is unfolding before you. Presence is not just keeping quiet, it is becoming so still within yourself that their words fall into you without resistance. Listening in this way transforms communication into communion. Most people are starving, not for advice, not for solutions, but for the simple experience of being heard. To listen with presence is to give them this nourishment. It allows you to see beyond what they say, into what they actually mean, to catch the emotions and unspoken truths that leak through the spaces between their sentences. When your awareness sharpens like this, the invisible essence of the other person begins to reveal itself naturally. This kind of listening requires surrender. You cannot be full of yourself and still receive another. You must lay down judgments, opinions, and inner commentary. Every label you attach to someone acts as a curtain over their reality. Presence tears down these curtains. In that state, you are no longer looking at a person through the filters of your memory. You are seeing them as they are in this very moment. That clarity is where the invisible becomes visible. When you listen with this depth, you begin to notice things that most overlook. A hesitation that hides fear, a sudden spark in the eyes that reveals excitement, a shift in tone that carries years of hidden pain. These signals are silent doors into the vast inner world of the person before you. To catch them, you need stillness, not analysis. The mind that constantly evaluates blinds you, but the mind that becomes silent perceives. Listening with presence is ultimately an act of respect. It is an acknowledgement that the person before you is not just a body with a mouth, but a whole universe of experiences, memories, joys and sorrows. When you give them your undivided attention, you honor that universe. And in doing so, you cultivate the ability to see the invisible in everyone, not as a mystical act, but as a natural consequence of true awareness. Every human being radiates an energy that words cannot define and appearances cannot capture. It is not something you can touch, yet it is the most real part of them. When you only look at the form, you meet their surface, but when you sense their energy, you encounter their essence. This energy is the living pulse of who they are, and it speaks louder than their personality, louder than their rehearsed behaviors, louder than the masks they wear. To feel this energy, you must shift your awareness from the eyes to the whole being. The eyes can deceive, but your deeper perception never lies. When you stop reducing people to what they show you and begin to sense what they radiate, you experience them at a level untouched by pretense. Their presence becomes tangible, almost like a fragrance that surrounds them. Some carry the weight of sadness, others the lightness of joy, some the intensity of struggle, and some the serenity of clarity. All of this is invisible to sight, but not to awareness. This way of perceiving demands silence within yourself. A noisy mind cannot sense the subtle. If your thoughts are constantly judging, comparing and measuring, you will miss the invisible force that every person emits. The more still you are, the more receptive you become, and the more easily you can feel the undercurrent of life flowing through another. Just as you cannot see the wind, but you feel its touch, you cannot see this energy, but you sense its presence in every interaction. Feeling someone's energy is not about analysis or interpretation, it is about direct perception. The moment you try to explain it, you reduce it. It is not something to be grasped by the intellect, but something to be experienced with sensitivity. When you allow yourself to be fully present, their energy speaks without words. It tells you stories that no conversation could capture, stories of what they carry in silence and what they have endured in shadows. Recognizing this unseen dimension changes the way you relate to people. You no longer respond only to their personalities, you begin to connect with their presence. This connection is deeper than emotion and stronger than thought. It is the meeting of energies, a recognition that beneath the surface differences, every human carries the same vital force of existence. To live this way is to walk through life sensing, not just faces and names, but the very pulse of life radiating in all directions. Most people present themselves to the world as strong, composed and in control, yet behind these polished surfaces lie struggles that rarely reach the light. A smile may be bright, but often it hides storms of pain. A confident posture may look unshakable, but beneath it could be years of doubt, fear or loss. To stop at the armor is to miss the truth, because the armor is not who they are, it is what they built to survive. When you see only the mask, you mistake survival for essence. To recognize the wounds is not to pity someone, but to acknowledge their humanity in its rawest form. Everyone carries scars, some carved by betrayal, some by failure, others by loneliness or rejection. These wounds shape behavior, they influence choices, they bend the way a person walks through life. Yet most people hide them, fearing judgment or weakness. When you learn to look beyond the surface, you see that every harsh word, every guarded response, every burst of pride often has its roots in hidden pain. This recognition requires sensitivity. It is easy to label someone as arrogant, cold, or distant, but it takes awareness to ask what wounds forced them to build such walls. The invisible battle is often louder than the visible behavior. A person who laughs too loudly may be drowning out silence. One who avoids closeness may be shielding themselves from abandonment. One who fights constantly may be defending against an old hurt. When you sense this, your perspective shifts from condemnation to understanding. Seeing the wounds beneath the armor does not mean prying or demanding confessions. It means cultivating an inner vision that notices the cracks in the shield, the tremble behind the smile, the heaviness in the eyes. You begin to realize that pain leaves imprints that the surface can never fully conceal. This awareness does not require analysis or intrusion, it requires presence, compassion, and a refusal to be fooled by appearances. When you truly see the invisible battles within people, your response to them changes. You stop meeting aggression with aggression, coldness with coldness, and distance with distance. Instead, you meet them with patience, empathy, and respect for the journey they are carrying. This shift transforms relationships because it is no longer armor meeting armor. It is one soul recognizing another soul's struggle. In that recognition lies the possibility of healing, connection, and a depth of human experience that appearances can never offer. Every human being, no matter their appearance, culture, or condition, carries within them the same fundamental spark of life. This spark is the force that animates, the invisible flame that keeps the heart beating and the breath flowing. It is the same in all, untouched by external differences, unshaken by the roles we play. When you acknowledge this spark, you stop seeing people as separate entities defined by their identities, and you begin to recognize them as expressions of the same living force. This spark of life is not loud or dramatic, it does not demand attention, yet it is the most powerful reality within a human being. Everything else, personality, beliefs, habits, is built on top of it. If you look closely enough, you will see that what makes someone truly alive is not their achievements or failures, not their stories or struggles, but this silent aliveness that burns within them. To miss it is to miss the very core of who they are. The challenge is that people cover this spark with layers of conditioning, fear and projection. Some bury it under pride, some under pain, some under indifference. But the spark never disappears, it remains, waiting to be recognized. When you approach someone with awareness, you learn to look past the coverings and sense the light that has not been extinguished, no matter how faint it may appear. This recognition requires a gaze that is not clouded by judgment or prejudice. When you honor the spark of life in another, you treat them differently. You no longer reduce them to their mistakes, their social status, or their outer behavior. You realize that beneath all these differences lies the same living force that also beats in your chest. This realization creates humility because you understand that no one stands above or below you in essence. You and they are equal expressions of the same source, just wearing different forms. To live with this awareness is to walk through the world with reverence. Every person you meet becomes sacred, not because of their position or power, but because they carry within them the same invisible flame of existence. When you see this spark in others, you cannot help but live with respect, compassion and connection. And in that recognition, life itself becomes richer because you are no longer entangled only with appearances. You are touching the very core of being. The mind is quick to judge, quick to label, and quick to categorize. The moment you meet someone, the mind decides who they are, what they represent, and where they belong in your hierarchy of likes and dislikes. These judgments may feel natural, but they are nothing more than barriers that prevent you from seeing the truth of the person in front of you. To let go of judgments is to strip away these distortions and meet reality as it is, not as your mind insists it should be. Judgment is rooted in memory. You have seen a certain type of behavior before, so you conclude this person must be the same. You have been hurt in a similar situation before, so you assume this person will hurt you too. In doing so, you never encounter the living presence before you, you only encounter your past. Dropping judgment is not about being blind, but about refusing to imprison others in the cages built by your experiences. It is about freeing your perception from the weight of old conclusions. When you release judgment, something profound happens. You begin to perceive people beyond their surface. Suddenly you notice details that were invisible when your mind was busy labeling. You see the gentleness hidden behind roughness, the intelligence concealed beneath simplicity, the strength covered by quietness. Without the fog of assumptions, the richness of human beings begins to reveal itself in ways you could not have imagined. Living without judgment requires courage because judgment gives the illusion of control. The mind likes to feel it knows, it likes to declare right and wrong, good and bad. But when you live in that narrow framework, you miss the vastness of life. Courage is needed to say, I do not know who this person truly is, and I am willing to see them without filters. That willingness opens doors to invisible dimensions that judgment has always kept shut. The moment you let go of judgments, your relationships deepen. People sense when they are seen without being measured or compared, and they naturally open up in your presence. Trust flows, authenticity rises, and the invisible layers of their being unfold. In such an atmosphere, connection is not forced, it is natural. To live without judgment is not only to see the invisible in others, it is to give them the freedom to be seen fully, without fear of being reduced to an idea in your mind. Silence is not merely the absence of words, it is a presence in itself. It holds a power that speech can never reach. When two people sit in silence, something deeper than language begins to move. In that stillness, you notice the unspoken, the subtle shifts in energy, the currents of emotion that no sentence could ever carry. Silence reveals dimensions of a person that words often hide, because most words are carefully chosen masks, while silence cannot be disguised. To connect through silence requires you to resist the constant urge to fill every gap with sound. Most people fear silence because it confronts them with themselves, but if you embrace it, silence becomes a bridge to another's essence. In those wordless moments, you feel the life in front of you without interference. Their presence becomes vivid, not because of what they say, but because of what they are. This is the kind of connection that does not need explanation, it is sensed, not spoken. Silence sharpens perception. In the absence of noise, the smallest expressions become thunderous. A glance, a breath, a pause, all of these speak louder than sentences when you are attuned. It is in silence that you see the child hidden within, the innocence that words often cover with seriousness or pretense. When you allow silence to do its work, you begin to see the invisible layers of being that cannot survive the glare of constant chatter. Silence also dissolves the boundaries created by language and opinion. Words divide, silence unites. Words are built on thought, but silence bypasses thought and connects at the level of presence. In silence, two individuals are not debating, not comparing, not competing. They are simply existing in awareness of each other. This dissolves the walls that words so often build and allows you to recognize the invisible bond of shared humanity. To connect through silence is to step into a deeper intimacy with life itself. It is to realize that understanding does not always come from explanations, that closeness is not always forged in conversation. Sometimes the most powerful recognition comes when nothing is said, yet everything is understood. In such moments, you are not merely hearing a person, you are touching the invisible essence that words can never capture. No two human beings are the same, even if they share the same blood, the same upbringing, or the same culture. Each person carries a unique fingerprint of consciousness, a way of experiencing life that cannot be duplicated. To overlook this uniqueness is to flatten the depth of existence into a lifeless uniformity. Respecting individuality is not about admiring differences on the surface. It is about recognizing that each person is an unrepeatable expression of life itself. When you fail to honor uniqueness, you begin to compare, to measure and to rank. Comparison blinds you because it forces people into categories that were never meant for them. The invisible richness of a person cannot be weighed on the scales of your preferences. To truly see someone, you must let go of the urge to evaluate them against another. Each individual carries qualities, strengths, and depths that cannot be understood by the framework of similarity or competition. Respecting uniqueness requires humility. It demands that you accept you do not know the full story of another person, and you do not need to. Their uniqueness is not for you to dissect, but to honor. When you approach someone with reverence for their individuality, you give them the freedom to express their true essence without fear of being reduced to a stereotype. This space allows their invisible dimensions to rise to the surface naturally. Every person, no matter how ordinary they appear, is extraordinary in some way. It may not be obvious, it may not align with society's measures of success, but it exists. A small gesture of kindness, a hidden resilience, a perspective shaped by struggle, all of these are treasures of uniqueness that can only be seen if you are attentive. To miss this is to miss the true wealth of human existence, because life does not repeat itself through people, it reinvents itself endlessly. When you begin to honor uniqueness in everyone, your interactions shift. You no longer treat people as replaceable or predictable. You begin to approach them as mysteries worth exploring, not problems to be solved or roles to be judged. This changes the quality of your relationships because people sense when they are seen in their individuality. In that recognition, their invisible light shines brighter and you experience them not as a copy of anyone else, but as the singular expression of life they were meant to be. Beneath every hardened exterior lies the innocence of a child that has never fully vanished. No matter how cold, harsh or unyielding someone may appear, deep within them is the same softness that once looked at the world with wonder. Life's struggles, betrayals and disappointments may have built layers of defense around it, but the child is still there, waiting to be seen. To recognize this is to pierce through the hardness and glimpse the raw purity that has not been destroyed, only hidden. The child within every person is the source of their deepest longings, their purest emotions, and their uncorrupted sense of wonder. It is the part that once trusted without fear, loved without hesitation, and dreamed without limitation. When life's weight crushes this part, people put on masks of toughness, indifference or cynicism, but these masks are fragile. If you look closely with sensitivity, You can still see the spark of innocence peeking through their eyes, even if they try to hide it behind walls of maturity or pride. Recognizing the child within someone softens your own vision. Instead of meeting anger with anger or indifference with indifference, you begin to see the vulnerable core behind the behavior. A person shouting may simply be a child demanding to be heard. A person withdrawing may simply be a child afraid of rejection. By seeing the child rather than the mask, you stop reacting to their defenses and begin responding to their humanity. This way of seeing requires compassion. It is not about reducing people to weakness, but about understanding that behind their strength lies a need for love, safety and acceptance. When you hold this awareness, you no longer take their harshness personally, because you understand it is not the child speaking, but the walls built around that child. Compassion allows you to reach past the outer shell and connect to the innocence that still exists, even if buried under years of pain. When you consistently see the child within others, you create space for healing and connection. People instinctively respond when they feel their innocence is acknowledged rather than ignored. They let down their guard, they soften, and their true essence begins to emerge. In such moments, the invisible becomes visible. The child that never died, the purity that life could not erase. To see this in others is not only to honor them, but also to awaken the same innocence within yourself. Curiosity comes from the mind, but compassion comes from the heart. When you look at someone with curiosity, you are trying to gather information, to analyze, to dissect. It is a movement of probing, often driven by the desire to know more rather than to understand. Compassion, on the other hand, does not probe, it embraces. It does not seek to expose, but to accept. Where curiosity makes people into subjects of observation, compassion allows them to remain human beings of dignity and depth. Curiosity often creates distance because it positions you as the observer and the other as the object. The invisible cannot be revealed under the scrutiny of a curious gaze because people instinctively withdraw when they feel examined. Compassion does the opposite, it draws people closer because it does not demand revelation but offers safety. When someone feels your compassion, they no longer hide behind their defenses. Their invisible self begins to show itself not through force but through trust. Compassion is not weakness, it is the highest form of strength. It takes power to meet someone's pain without turning away, to hold their flaws without judgment, to recognize their light even when it is buried under shadows. Curiosity only wants to know, but compassion wants to connect. And connection is what allows you to see the invisible, the essence that is not visible to the eye, but felt deeply in the presence of genuine care. When you approach people with compassion, you begin to sense what lies beyond their words, beyond their masks, beyond their roles. You see the light that animates them, the same light that animates you. This recognition dissolves the illusion of separation. You no longer look at people as strangers to be figured out, but as fellow beings whose lives carry the same pulse of existence. Compassion opens the door to a depth of perception that curiosity could never touch. Living with compassion transforms every encounter. You stop meeting people with suspicion or evaluation and start meeting them with openness and reverence. This shift makes the invisible glow within them visible to you. Their struggles, their joys, their silent battles, their untold dreams. Compassion allows you to touch life at its core, where no labels, no judgments and no divisions exist. It is here that the invisible light of every human being shines, waiting to be seen by those who have the eyes to look with love. When you cultivate this way of seeing, people are no longer just bodies or roles. They become windows to life itself, To see the invisible is not to imagine something mystical, but to recognize what was always there yet overlooked. If you begin to see people this way, life will no longer feel crowded, it will feel connected, no longer shallow, but profound.